There. Well, joining me now is the international security consultant Marco Vicenzino. Thanks very much for coming in. Given the nature of this attack and the fact we've seen similar, what one might say, low-tech attacks across Europe, sadly, recently, some people might be surprised in a way that it's taken such a long time for us to see something like this in America.
I mean, and it's these type of attacks, you call them lone wolf attacks. That's what it appears to be. They are cheap, because they can claim many lives. It costs nothing to rent a vehicle. It's effective. You claim as many lives as possible. You win headlines, which you can use for recruitment purposes. And it tries to create a state of fear. And on that point of that state of fear, one could use the argument that Western societies have become far more resilient. Remember, the U.S. have had attacks in Orlando, you had attacks out in California, and throughout the Western world. This is similar. In Europe, you would draw parallels to London in March 2017, Berlin last Christmas, you had Nice, which was a large-scale attack with a truck in July of 2016. All the Western societies, is it creating a state of fear? In my opinion, I think the Western societies have become far more resilient. It's important, and political leadership plays a role here. It's important to promote vigilance, but not fear. And in this sense, it also, you look at the profile of the individuals. Here is, you have an individual, young person from Uzbekistan. It draws somewhat similar parallels, possibly self-radicalized. Similar in profile, you'd say, to the Tsarnaev brothers in the Boston bombings. But if you look at New York, last night, that resilience factor I was speaking about, the annual Halloween parade, which draws thousands of people, went on. And on this Sunday, November 5th, you have the New York City Marathon, one of the largest marathons in the world. Will take place. Obviously, there'll be increased security, but life is somewhat back to normal, I would say.
But for the authorities, they will be thinking, as you say, with big events coming up, they will be thinking, what can we do to make sure we lower risk as much as possible? I suppose the issue with fairly low-key attacks like this is it's almost impossible to put in enough barriers to, if someone's determined to get through, presumably it's very hard to stop them ultimately.
You can't prevent these type of attacks, but you can reduce the probabilities of these attacks. And obviously that it's between citizens and authorities. There's that need to always increase that relationship between the two. Once again, we talk about responsible leadership from politicians, but also there needs to be responsibility of citizens. That issue of vigilance.
So to say if you see something you're worried about, if you suspect something.
Yeah, and in that sense also, if you look, I mean, the location where it took place was near the World Trade Center site. You have the upcoming Christmas season in New York. So once again, it's that desire to want to create fear. And there's also, it impacts political, cultural, social, and legal environments. Obviously, the president has seized upon this for his immigration argument. That's inevitable. The question being, do we know who's coming into our societies? And you have an individual who came in who's off the radar screen of the societies. And then also, you look at the political fallout. And the political fallout is that debate between civil liberties and national security. If you look at France, for example, France had we're approaching the second anniversary of the Paris attacks. For 2 years, you had a state of emergency in France, which was renewed 6 times. This week, that state of fear, that state of emergency comes to an end, but there's going to be new legislation, and that new legislation is going to include a lot of elements from the state of security, which has civil liberty groups up in arms. But that legislation will be up for review every 2 years. Once again, these type of attacks are impacting society at all levels. It's a new reality. You could call it the new normal, which will continue for the foreseeable future.
You mentioned political leadership and how it's handled. We've seen this tweet from President Trump about the visa program, particularly the lottery element of it. It appears this man came in legally through the lottery-based element of the US visa program. But as you rightly pointed out, as far as we know, he would have ticked all the boxes. There was nothing that would have flagged on that. He would have been checked. So it's a real challenge for the authorities to try and vet in any way who's coming in, because sometimes these people, the radicalization process takes place in a much less obvious way. It may just be happening at home on their computer.
I mean, probably if the Tsarnaev brothers, I'll refer to the Boston bombers and this individual. With this individual, we don't know yet. For the Tsarnaev bombers, quite clear. It seems that when they arrived in the U.S., there was no radicalization. It was over the years, as they grew up in U.S. society, issues of integration. Maybe they didn't feel part. There's several elements. There's no one single profile. But that process of self-radicalization begins over time, and a lot of it on the internet. Hence, also the responsibility, not just of political leadership of citizens, but also of the private sector, is vetting online.
You're saying tech companies have a responsibility.
Facebook, social media, to see where, Google, for example, is to see where these searches are taking place. So it's not just the responsibility of law enforcement, it's also the responsibility of the private sector.
OK, lots of things to think about there. Marco Vicenzino, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Indeed. Here, a major report examining the experiences of the Hillsborough families has just been released. It was commissioned after inquests last year found the 96 football fans were unlawfully killed, and it aims to inform authorities in their handling of current and future disasters.